Whether you're dating like Lisha or married like me, keep listening to hear some tips about how to talk about money with your partner. Hello, and welcome to the Wealth Minded MD podcast with your money best friends. I'm Dr. Brittne Helford.
And I'm Dr. Lisha Taylor.
And of course, we're here to help you build wealth and make good money decisions so you can create the life you desire with more control over your time. Hey, Lisha, one of the most important financial tasks we do as doctors is protect ourselves, which means getting the right insurance. I recall purchasing my insurance policy just a few days before I graduated from residency. What was your experience?
So I got my insurance when I graduated from medical school right before I started residency. I actually called a few agents, but I had the best service from Pradeep Auto at PKA Insurance Group. He was super responsive and personable. Unlike some of the other agents, Pradeep actually got me quotes from all the major companies and actually took the time to explain the nuances in each of their policies. What I loved most is that he wasn't just this way for me. Whenever I would send one of my friends to him, he would not only speak to them, but he'd also let them know where to go or who to contact if there were better options or discounts available.
At PKA Insurance Group, Pradeep Auto and Matthew Peterson are independent brokers focusing on disability and life insurance. They excel in securing coverage for physicians and other medical professionals. Discounts on disability insurance can range from 10 to 40% depending on your situation. And there is now an A+ rated carrier offering up to $10 million of life insurance without lapse. If you are very healthy with limited to no medical issues, approval is likely in 5 minutes. Reach out to PKA Insurance to discuss your disability or life insurance needs at www.pkainsurance.com or call 1-800-258-1018. Hey, money best friend, we want to hear from you.
That's right. We need to know a little about you to improve this podcast and ensure we give you the best content possible.
Are you a wealth-minded doctor like us navigating the challenges of money and medicine, or are you in a totally different field?
Are you in your early 30s like me or a bit older like Brittne?
Hey, I'm not that old. If you wouldn't mind, head over to the podcast show notes, click the link for the survey, and kindly fill out this super short 6-question survey.
Based on your answers, we will tailor the podcast to fit your needs. Thanks in advance for filling it out, and don't forget to leave a review.
We appreciate you. Lisha, how's your life been? Because over here, I've been managing so much. I'm so exhausted at the end of the day that I've literally been going to bed around 9:30 every single night because it's just been a lot.
I'm sorry that you're dealing with a lot. I too have a lot going on, but I'm going to talk about something positive. So my cousins, I think I mentioned on a previous episode, are graduating. And so my family is like trying to throw them this huge soiree. And so one part of the celebration is a dinner, and we're having it at a very fancy restaurant. It's like $100 a plate. It's like a very big thing. And then we are taking them down to Florida. Half my family lives in Atlanta, the other half lives in Florida. And they're going to have a big pool party at one of my cousins' houses in Florida. And then the other big thing that we are doing for my cousins who are graduating, because there's 3 of them graduating at the same time. The other thing we're doing for them is they are going on a family cruise. So we're taking them to the Bahamas. I'm not going on this trip because I was like, look, y'all, we go on too many family vacations. I already took time off for the other trip. I've been to the Bahamas like 10 times. I'm good on this one. Y'all have fun. But they're taking them on a cruise. I know it's a lot. And my family loves to celebrate. They feel like graduating is a big milestone. Fun fact, when I graduated from high school, I have a lot of aunts, as I think I mentioned on the other episodes, because my dad has 8 siblings and my mom has 13. One particular aunt, she would, each time that any of us, because there's like a gazillion cousins, would graduate from high school, she would write us a check for $1,000. And this was like back when I was in high school. So this is a big deal back then. Like $1,000 back then is like, I don't know, $2,000, $3,000 now. Anyway, she'll write us a check for $1,000. She had basically gotten money from like a car accident settlement like a long time ago. And she decided that she was going to give our family part of the money. And one of the ways that she did that was like writing large checks whenever we hit various milestones. And one of those milestones was high school graduation. And so everybody in our family, whenever we graduated from high school, be so excited because we knew that our Aunt Maxine was going to write us a check for $1,000. And as an 18-year-old back then, it was like huge deal. So
Hmm.
anyway, high school graduations, graduation in general, whether it's high school, college, whatever, has always been a big deal. And for my cousins, we are sort of going all out. And so I have a question for you. Like, is this something that you all do? Is my family just like weird in that way? But I'm curious if your family also does the high school graduation big celebratory thing.
We do. We do. We call it in Michigan open houses. I don't know if that's a thing.
Never heard that term.
It's like you're going to purchase real estate, right? And you go to an open house. And so essentially what it is, it's a graduation celebration. You show all of your accomplishments and you send out invitations and various people, your teachers, principals, family members, friends, they all come out and they have a good time. They look at your accomplishments, all of your accolades, and they give you money. And so it's called an open house. But my nephew is graduating from community college, and Kevin's cousin, who is living with us for a year, he's graduating from Vanderbilt. And so Brooke has been like, whatever your aunties or whoever's planning, she's been on party mode. Brooke's like you. She loves a good party and she loves to plan the party. Elijah, he arrived today and she's like, oh, mommy, we have to plan Elijah's graduation party. I said, well, Brooke, we're going to have it together with Damani, my nephew. She's like, well, mommy, Elijah is arriving in May. Damani is coming in June. We can't have one party. We have to have two parties because they're not coming at the same time. Like, we can't celebrate both of them at the same time. So she's all about party planning. So we will have some type of graduation celebration. We don't have the lovely Aunt Maxine, though. No $1,000 checks here. Maybe I'll put a little cash in their pocket, but it's not going to be a grand.
Oh, no, no. I never heard this concept of open house. Wait, is this a Michigan thing? Is this a Boston, Massachusetts thing? Is this a Brittany's family thing? Like, who does the open house thing?
I think it might be a Michigan thing, but honestly, it's like college or high school graduation party. My niece, she's graduating from high school as well, and she's having one in Georgia. We're not going to be able to make it this year because we've been traveling a lot and closing on at home, but she's having one in Georgia. So I think we just call it open house, but it's like a graduation party.
Interesting. I never heard of this. I
Mhm.
learn something new all the time. But yeah, my cousins are so excited because my family takes vacations very seriously, as you all can tell on this podcast. And so I think the cruise came in because they hear about us always going on these vacations. We go on large family vacations, and usually we don't take my little cousins. I call them little, but they're graduating from high school. So they're like 17, I guess. But to me, they are little because they're substantially younger than I am. But anyway, they always think it's unfair because we never bring them along. The reason we don't bring them is because they're like broke best friends. Like they're fun, but it's like, look, this is expensive. Like my family went to Alaska. I don't know if I told you this. We did an Alaskan cruise last summer, like around August. And a lot of my extended family went on that cruise, but we didn't take any of the cousins because we were like, look, we're not paying like 3 or 4 grand for each little cousin. Y'all are fun, but this is gonna be adults only. Adult as in gotta pay your own way. So anyway, they always feel slighted because they don't always bring them. And so when we asked them like what they wanted for their graduation, they were like, we want to go on a cruise. You guys never take us. So taking them on a little, 4-day cruise to the Bahamas. They're gonna have a good time. They're so excited about it. And so yeah, it's nice to be able to celebrate them. I sort of like you, I'm not going on the cruise. I mentioned this early because I've just been to the Bahamas a bunch of times, but I am going to like some of the dinners and some of the other celebrations that we're having for them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm so happy that your family gets to celebrate them and they feel like they've done something well, in which they have. And hopefully that continues to motivate them to be successful in the future. So, congratulations, graduates.
What's going on in your world?
I like the positive spin that you put on this podcast just to share a little bit. Part of the dual identity or multi identity that we carry, I think, as women, as clinicians, it can be hard to navigate. And one of the things that I've been navigating is when someone is ill in my family, I am the only physician in my family.
Wait, isn't your husband a doctor?
Okay, all right, all right.
Sorry, I just couldn't resist because you literally are married to a doctor. But he's a psychiatrist. I get what you're saying. Anyway, continue.
He's a psychiatrist, but what I'm saying is,
Poor Kevin.
I think my mother and my father might reach out to him, depending on for some things. He's been in the family for a decade. I get it. But I guess what I'm trying to say is like genetically, like I'm the only one that is a physician, right? And so when there's something that's wrong, if my mom is not here with my husband, sometimes she'll talk and say, Kevin, I want your perspective on this. But usually they come to me, right? especially when someone is sick and they want to get a second opinion. Also, although some family members can be very literate in other domains of their lives, health literacy still is an all-time low, especially for my family. So I'm navigating like how can I bridge this gap of being a liaison, communicating things in a way that they understand. It helps to ameliorate some of the anxiety that they have about this person being sick. How do I do that in a way where I'm not so emotional? How do I do that in a way that allows me to be a family member and I can take off my physician hat? And then when I need to put on my physician hat to like advocate for a specific standard of care, how do I do that in a way that's respectful to that physician's thought process and diagnostic decision making? And so it's been a lot recently with just navigating some illnesses in my family and having to wear the multiple hats and doing that well.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. First of all, I'm sorry that you're going through that. And let me clarify, it wasn't that I don't think psychiatrists are doctors. Let me clarify this real quick. Is that you work in the hospital. And so I can understand how if your family members need to choose a physician to talk to, they're going to talk to the one that they're immediately related to, right? Because it's your family, like your mom, your dad. And then two, they probably want to talk to someone who literally works in the hospital, which you do. And your husband, Kevin, although an amazing physician, is a psychiatrist who doesn't work in the hospital, from my understanding. Anyway, that's what I meant by that. I just thought it was funny because you're like, there's no other doctors in my family. Literally, you're married to one. But I hear what you're saying. I'm sorry that you're going through that. And I also want to say that I can empathize with you because I feel the same way. I also have a family member who is in the hospital. And I also go through this stage in my brain where I'm like, okay, let me take off my doctor hat and just be a family member today. Right.
Mhm.
Sometimes they will ask me specific things. And then in which case I put my doctor hat back on and I say, okay, well, these are the odds. This is what I would tell my patients if my patients had the same thing. But I find that a lot of the times, at least for my family, they just really want me to be there and be supportive. Sometimes they'll ask me questions on the side, but most of the time it's just like I'm there to be supportive and I need to remind myself of that because sometimes it can be hard to separate
Mhm.
like Lisha the doctor from Lisha the daughter or Lisha the cousin or whatever. And my brother married a physician. So my sister-in-law is a physician and I have like some distant cousins because I have a gazillion family members who are physicians. Fun fact, I don't know if I told you this. My boss's boss is my cousin. Did I mention this before?
No.
I have so many family members that I do not always know who is related to me. I know you're laughing. That's how it is. So my boss's boss, I work at an academic institution. So the dean of like clinical affairs, like the high up dean, one of the high up deans, he is my distant cousin. I didn't know this because I have too many family members and I don't always know who they are. He's like a second cousin, I want to say.
Mhm.
But he has the same last name as my mom's maiden name. But my parents have been married for like 40 years. My mom doesn't go by her maiden name anymore. And so, although I know what my mom's maiden name is, it doesn't always register for me like when I'm meeting people for the first time. And so, he literally has my mom's maiden name. We were in a meeting. This is so embarrassing. We are in a meeting, like a Zoom meeting, and like somebody was like, let's do introductions, right? And doing an introduction, or someone's introducing me, and they're like, oh, here's Dr. Taylor. She's new. She grew up in Pensacola, Florida. And then he stops the meeting. He goes, wait, are you from blah, blah, blah? It's like, is your mama this? In the middle of the meeting. And I was like, how do you know my mama? What? And he was like, I went to school with you. I was like, what? How do we know each other? He was like, we're related. And I was like, okay, so this is interesting. And also, I'm never getting fired because just call my mom. That's what happens when you have a million family members. But I just thought I would share that story that literally one of the deans at my academic institution is like my second cousin. And I called my mom and my mom was like, yeah, I know Earl. And I was like, oh my God, it's so interesting. Anyway, I don't even remember my point anymore. I think I was just talking about how I have a million family members and how a couple of them are doctors that apparently I didn't know existed.
That's the purpose of those family reunions, so you can see, like, those distant cousins and try to put the family tree together. All right, so now it's time for our financial focus. Lisha, I'm always curious to know what single people or people who are dating think about managing money with your partner because I can reflect back on that time, when I had conversations with my husband when we were just dating, and I have a bunch of stories. And I also know what money looks like now after being together for 13 years and being married for almost a decade. How money looks like so fluid between my husband and I. Like it's almost no money is his and no money is mine. It's just like all in, not necessarily one pot, but it's everybody's money. So, when you think about managing money with your partner, can you share how you've done this dating? What has been important to you? Some of the things that you've heard? Let's have this conversation.
I've had different conversations depending on who I've been dating at the time. So, as our audience knows, I'm not married. Brittany's married. And so she's sort of asking, how do I navigate this as like a single person or a person who's dating? And it really does depend on the person that I'm dating and like how long we've been together. But, I do think that this is important, right? As females, especially female physicians or female high earners, this conversation is really critical because we may be the breadwinner or we may be the partner to somebody else who also makes a lot of money. And I think that sometimes the conversations that we have about money are a little bit different when you start making a lot of it. I find this has been my experience that a lot of women who maybe don't make as much money or maybe who are homemakers or have other roles inside of the home but don't necessarily earn an income. Sometimes they may not be as involved in the finances, but it seems like the more money that you make, the more involved you want to be, right? Because you have a vested interest in knowing how that money is being spent, invested, earned, that sort of thing. And so I think this is a really big conversation that impacts a lot of physicians like you and I. And also because the divorce rates are really high. And so as someone who's not married and who plans to be married, at some point in my life, for me, it's about not only choosing the right partner, but also ensuring that we have a certain degree of financial wellness so that we are not in a situation that can lead to divorce. When you look at the studies, a lot of the causes of divorce, one of them is financial arguments or financial mismatch, if you will. And so I find that it's really important for women in particular to have their own financial identity that may be separate from their spouse or separate from their partner, and to be able to have some degree of financial confidence in being able to manage things. And as I've become more financially confident and more financially well, one of the things that's been really important to me as I'm dating is ensuring that whoever I'm dating at the time also has a certain level of financial wellness. And so we'll talk
Mhm.
about later on about some of the questions that I've asked people as I'm dating in order to be able to better assess that. And I think it'll be interesting for our audience to also hear how you and your husband kind of talk about things as a married couple. So really excited to kind of delve into this.
Yeah, yeah. I wholeheartedly agree with you that this is a conversation that we must have as women, but just anyone who is thinking about developing a long term relationship with a partner because you don't want to have finances to be the focus or a foundation for separation. That's not why you're getting in the relationship. And what I find is that when you can have these conversations up front, they're not going to be necessarily like the most pleasant and everybody's excited to sit down and to have this conversation. But I would argue to say that it's one of the most critical conversations that you should have even early on in a relationship. And I can reflect on meeting my husband. This is probably like our third or fourth date. We were both in medical school and having a conversation about our credit scores and just like starting there. So it's really important, especially because women historically have been left out of the conversation. Women historically have not had as many years to practice. And now that women are the breadwinners or making a significant amount of the finances, it is important that if something were to happen to your partner, even if you defer the financial management to them, you at least feel confident in doing it yourself so that you can help to maintain the family's financial wellness if something were to happen to the other partner. Alrighty. So, Lisha, when I think about this, I mentioned that my husband and I had our first conversation when we were in medical school. And I can remember, like, I was on the couch, he was sitting on the floor, and we both had our computers. And I was like, hey, what's your credit score? And he didn't know his credit score. So we pulled up our credit scores and then we started to do a comparison. It was kind of like pulling up our step one scores for those of you who are not in medicine or not physicians. We all have to take board exams. So step one, it's much different than what it was when I was in medical school. But it's like that first board exam. It's like that first standardized exam that helps you or hurts you in getting into your residency program. And so it was a big exam that everybody's preparing for in medical school from like day one. Everyone starts to talk about the step exam and preparing for the step exam. So it was a difficult conversation because we're comparing credit scores. But one of the things that at least allowed us to do that is because I felt safe and he felt safe in that space, that there was like no judgment and that we could be really open with each other. So I would say the first step is to make sure you have a strong financial friendship, one that fosters safety. What about you, Lisha? When you've had these conversations in the past, what are some of like those relationship components that have made the conversation more successful?
Yeah, I don't know if I've had conversations about the person's credit score on date 3, but I think, like, for me, when I'm dating, if it's like a first date, usually I'm not really talking about money. And, sometimes I've not been super transparent about what I do for a living just because I find that there's a lot of judgment whenever I'm on a date and I'm telling someone that I'm a physician. I think people have certain perceptions that come to mind, like, oh, she has a lot of money. Oh, she's really, really smart. Oh, she has a different lifestyle. I don't know if I can afford that, all of these things. And I try to eliminate that, or that usually is not what I want to talk about on the first date. And so usually when I am first dating someone, it's more of like I'm just getting a vibe and trying to see if this is somebody that I want to be around, if they're just a person of good character, integrity, that sort of thing. However, I am looking at certain things, or I'm looking at, are they somebody who's driving like a very expensive car? Are they someone who's wearing a really expensive watch? Maybe I'll talk about vacations and I'll get a sense for, okay, is this someone who likes to travel or spends a lot of money on travel and that sort of thing? And what I'm looking at is not, okay, I need someone who drives a fancy car, does all of these things. I'm just looking at, where do you spend your money? What are the things that you prioritize? Because that's really important to me, is getting a sense for how do they spend money and seeing if they're maybe as frugal as I am, or maybe they're a lot less frugal, and trying to pick up some of that signs just from what I can absorb in our conversations. But I won't usually in the first couple of days just like start talking about credit scores. When we've built up a certain level of trust, I guess, as you would say, then I do delve deeper, but I try to be very measured about how I bring these things up, because I know that I care a lot about money. I used to work in finance and I do this podcast with you. I invest a lot of money in. So I know where I stand on these things. And I just know that it's not as common for someone to be as jazzed up about finance as I am. So usually when I'm dating somebody, usually I'm the one that's like the finance nerd. And I never want to make someone feel inadequate or make someone feel like I'm judging them. And so usually I try to ask questions in a non judgmental way. So, for example, if I'm trying to assess whether or not they invest money, I may not say, do you invest money? Right? That sounds a little loaded, or can sound loaded. What I will usually say is something along the lines of, hey, a lot of people in my friend circle invest a lot of money in stocks or bonds and things like that. Some of my friends don't really feel comfortable investing. Where do you lie? Something along those lines. So then, in a way, it sounds less judgmental. I feel like I'm better able to get a more accurate response. Oh, I don't really
Mm.
feel comfortable investing. Or actually, I invest a lot too. Or if I'm trying to assess if someone is charitable and generous, I may not say, do you give money to your church? Right? What I might say is like, hey, some people really value giving money away. Maybe it's for the tax breaks. Maybe it's because they have a cause that they really believe in. Other people feel like they want to get themselves in a better financial situation before they start giving money away. Where do you stand? You know what I mean? And I think usually I'm able to get a sense for, okay, this is someone who really values giving, or this is someone who maybe doesn't value it as much as I do. Sometimes I will ask, hey, some people manage money on their own, some people hire that out. Are you someone who has a financial advisor? And so, again, these are the kinds of questions that I am typically bringing up when I'm dating somebody. Again, not date 1 or date 2, but as we've gotten to know each other for a while, that really help me assess someone's degree of financial confidence and financial wellness, or at least my perception of it. And then as we, dating for a while, we'll get more and more comfortable. And then maybe we'll talk about how much money we each have investing, and talk about how much debt we have, and talk about our credit scores. But I think for me, it's really trying to see what I can absorb just from normal conversation, and then asking these questions in a non-judgmental way so that the person does feel like they're safe enough to answer honestly.
I think that's a great approach, especially as you're dating someone. When I think about how money looks now for us in managing money, transparency has become very critical. When we were dating and everything was separate, we weren't as transparent about how much money we had in accounts or what accounts we were using, because honestly, it really didn't matter. My money was my money and his money was his. And sometimes we would pay for each other to go on dates, right? Or purchase each other gifts, but it really didn't matter. Now, as we manage money, the transparency piece is so critical for us, just navigating this whole thing, for him to know that, okay, Brittany is looking at my accounts, but she's not judging me for, $700 I spent at Nike. Or did it sound like there was a little bit of judgment there?
Actually, I wasn't gonna say anything, but you said it, so I'm definitely going to acknowledge that Kevin seems to be judged for how much he spends at Nike.
I don't know if it was $700 or not, but again, all of our bills are paid. All of our investments are funded. All of the retirement accounts, all of our financial goals are met. So the rest is just play money. And how he plays with his money versus how I play with my money is completely different. And we allow for the relationship to have transparency, but also allowing for self differentiation, which I think is so imperative because when you're managing money with your partner, you can sometimes start to be critical about how they're spending money, especially if it's very different than how you have spent money in the past or what you think is an appropriate way to spend money.
I was going to ask you that because that has been one of the things that I've struggled with, if I'm being very transparent, is that when I'm dating people, sometimes they spend money in ways that I would not spend money. And it's trying to say, like,
Mhm.
okay, somebody values something differently than I do. That doesn't necessarily make that wrong. Like, we talked about this. I'm not a huge car person. So to me, I would never spend $1,000 a month on a car payment. Like, that just seems asinine to me. Like, I would rather invest that money or save that money or go on a trip, right? But for somebody else, maybe they really do value cars and that brings them a
Mhm.
lot of joy. And it's like, okay, let me not judge them for the way that they choose to spend money. As long as, like you said, the bills are paid, they've got a certain amount that they're investing and saving each month. The rest is excess. And if they want to use their excess in a different way, then that's fine. But I wondered how you and your husband have sort of, because you're just a chill person in general, just as me knowing you. But I wondered if this ever bothered you, like the fact that maybe he spends more money than you do in certain arenas and how you got to a point. Obviously, you guys have been together for a long time, how you got to the point where that didn't bother you as much.
Yeah, it's a journey. And one of the things that I would just say for anyone who is managing money with a partner, whether you're just dating that partner or you've been married to that partner for double digits, it is a journey. And you have to also know that there's a growth mindset. If you would say that way that this person spends their money now and their financial literacy, their financial wellness is always going to be that way, then you would be limiting yourself from maybe having a very strong relationship with someone who can help you to develop and you all can build wealth together. So when my husband and I first started, a lot of things were separate. We dated long distance. So when I was in medical school, he was in medical school in Southern Illinois and I was in Chicago. When we got married, I was a resident ending my residency and he was ending medical school and he was a year in Atlanta by himself while I was in St. Louis. So everything was basically separate at that point because we didn't have any shared expenses and there was no judgment. If he wanted to fly to see me or wanted to purchase something or whatever, I tried not to judge. Lisha, I am not perfect at this. There are times in which I bring up things that are of concern. I love how you said that you were measured in how you offered questions so that you can gather the information that you desired, but also not seem judgmental. And I think that's a really great approach because there are times in which my husband and I have a conversation and he's just not on board. That's just it. Like he's just not on board. One thing was HSA versus FSA, and we were under his insurance, and I wanted to switch over to my insurance plan because it offered an HSA that I wanted to get the match for in investing. And he just wasn't on board at that time. And so then it's like, okay, you're not on board with this. I'm going to be okay with that. And now, how do I be strategic about still maximizing the value of this FSA so it can offset the expense of what we're losing? In a relationship, one partner is going to be more financially literate than the other. One partner is going to be more of a spender than a saver. And I think you just have to honor that you have different identities, that there is value in both of those, and adopt the growth mindset that where your partner is today doesn't mean that they're always going to be there. And also acknowledge that there is some limitation to not spending and like enjoying the moment and saving every single dime. And so acknowledging that you got with this person for a reason, you saw something in them, and how can you value and respect that while still meeting in the middle so that you have this shared financial vision.
Yeah. It reminded me of something my therapist was working with me on. When I was seeing one person, I remember one of the things that used to like annoy me a little bit. And it's not a big deal, but just like when we would be driving somewhere, he would be driving. And then like I would know of a more efficient route, but he wouldn't take that route. He would take a different route. And I would be like, hey, there's a fast way. And he's like, yeah, I know, but I want to go this way. Right. And in my head, that would be annoying because I would be like, this is inefficient. And I remember my therapist saying, can we do a reframe? She was like, most people do not wake up and say, I want to be inefficient today. So it's not that he's trying to be inefficient. It's that he values something else. Maybe he just
Mhm.
values going a route and not having to follow the GPS because it's a route that he knows versus taking a new route that he doesn't. And maybe just when he gets home from work, he just wants to go the route he knows. And yes, it may take a couple of minutes longer, but is that going to kill you? Is that the end of the world? Right. And so she
Right.
was helping me sort of realize that I may value something or view something in a different way than somebody else. And if I just think about it from their perspective, oftentimes I am a little less annoyed. And so that sort of reminded me of this when you were talking about how you and Kevin maybe value different things. But I was curious, as someone who's married, you were talking about how you all do value different things and how he tends to be the one who prefers more of the luxury stuff than you do. Do you all set limits on spending? And not just to get into your business, but I'm just curious as to how you all have navigated things as a married couple. Like, are there certain limits to which you'll say, okay, if someone spends over this amount, then you ask the other person or you vet it through the other person? Or is it just once you guys have gotten to a certain financial position, you just don't really worry about it? And as long as the big ticket items are taken care of, you just spend however you desire. Like, how do you all do that? I'm curious.
I think when you're approaching sharing money or managing finances with someone, there are a couple of approaches that I've heard. So, one is one pot. You put everything in one pot, all of the income comes into one account, and you pay all the bills from that account. You have all of your fun from that account. I've also heard that you have kind of these separate accounts. He has his account or she has her account. Your other partner has their account. And you just say, okay, well, out of your account, you're going to pay the utilities bill, you're going to pay the Wi Fi, you're going to pay, I don't know, half of the mortgage. And then out of your account, there are other expenses. So you keep everything separately. So one pot, two pots, or three pots. And we kind of do the three pot thing where we have one account that is shared. All of our shared expenses, so daycare, mortgage, utilities, car stuff, everything that is shared, we divide up those expenses, figure out how much income needs to come in from his side and also from my side into that account to provide a little bit of a cushion, right? Just in case we spend a little bit more than we thought. And then we have each of our own accounts. We also, not only out of the expense account, we also have an emergency fund shared account and a couple of other shared savings account, but then we have our separate accounts. And so out of that separate accounts, once all the expenses and everything are accounted for, we basically can save or spend as we please from that account. That doesn't mean that like my husband is just spending multi-thousand dollars on things, but when there are big ticket items, because we respect each other, because we honor and we know that ultimately it still is one pot. If that shared account is negative, he's putting some money in from his account, from his play money, and I'm contributing from my play money. So ultimately it is just one big pot, but we just respect that, okay, if I'm going to do this, as for example, I wanted to enroll in this coaching program for my business and it cost $4,000. So I had a conversation with him, not to get his permission. I didn't need his permission. I had the money in the bank. It's my money. I go to work every day for it, right? I've worked hard for it. It's my money. But because I respect and value his opinion, and if something were to happen, that I spent money on this other thing instead of supporting the family, I wanted to share with him, hey, I'm thinking about enrolling in this coaching program because fill in the blank, and it costs $4,000. I just wanted to let you know that this is something that I was planning to do. Is there anything else that I have forgotten about that we need to use this money for? That's it. So it's sharing with him, this is something I intend to do. I respect and value your opinion. And I want to make sure that by spending this money on this large expense, I'm not jeopardizing our family. Similarly, when he bought the Mercedes, he did the same thing. Let's go get a Mercedes because clearly I'm still driving a 19-year-old Saturn Ion. Didn't really matter to me, but I know how hard he works. And I know that he had also driven a very old car for a long time. And we didn't get a car note. We paid cash. And so he's like, hey, I want to get this car for this reason. I've done my research. This is how I think we can pay for it. We have our emergency savings, all the investments and everything. So it wasn't like there was a little bit of hesitancy, like, hey, do you want to look at a cheaper car? But after he's like, no, I want to see it. Like, do you want to go with me to the dealership? And I rode around it and I saw the bright colors and all of that because there's like LED lights within the car and they change colors or whatever. So, I saw that there were some features that I would love. And then he's like, so what do you think? And I was like, oh, well, if we're going to get this and pay this money, I would definitely get the third row just in case so that this car could grow with me. So he asked my input, but he wasn't necessarily asking for my permission. So that's kind of what we have chosen to do for some of those bigger purchases. We don't want our partner to be blindsided, but we also don't want to feel like we have to ask for permission because we've worked and we've earned it. And so we should be able to spend our money with freedom and the flexibility as we choose.
I love that. I'm like taking notes here. I love how you all do this because I've heard this a lot in terms of like technically it's everybody's money, but usually when it comes to high income females, I will say, most of us are like, okay, we can do the one pot thing. But usually I find that people who do the one pot thing are people who got married like as teenagers or like early 20s,
Right.
right? And so they like grew into their income together. But it seems to be, or at least in my friend circle, that people who get married later in life, when both persons are established, they tend to do the we're going to have separate accounts and we'll have a joint account for joint expenses. And it seems like you all do that where you have your separate accounts, your fun money that you can spend as you please. And it seems like you all respect each other enough where if it's a large item, even if you are going to pay for it out of your own money, you still respect the other person and let them know, which I love. And then you all have a certain percentage that you put into your joint account and into a savings account. Do you all have a joint amount that you all say as a family you're going to invest each year and then I guess contribute equally to the investments? And I'm curious, like, how the investments work and how any debt works. Like when you had student loans, did you all both pay down student loans or was that mainly you? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So for student loan debt, we kind of adopted that as our own debt. It wasn't a shared family debt. So when I was paying off my student loans, my husband was still in his residency training and in fellowship when I paid off my student loan. So he wasn't making a ton of money. He did some moonlighting shifts here and there, but all of my student loans I paid off myself. I think maybe I borrowed like $1,000 from our emergency fund or something like that. Like, hey, let's just get this done and paid off, and then I'll put the money back. So that's how it worked. And for his student loans, similarly, he paid off his student loans. We refinanced. And so I was on the refinance application just so that it could get approved. And otherwise, he was going to ask his mom. And I'm like, I'm married to you. Like, why? You don't have to ask your mama. So yeah, so I was on his student loan application but he paid it all off with his hard-earned money. When we talk about investing, a little bit of investing is play money for each of us because there's some risk to it, right? And so we have our joint investment accounts and then we have our separate accounts. And so if I want to choose a REIT or like Kevin, he did this whole cryptocurrency thing. It was so funny. So he's like on his phone, and he's on Robinhood and he's part of this like guys group. And so the guys group are talking about like how much money they're making with this cryptocurrency. I'm like, okay, fine. That's your play money. And so he invested a certain amount of crypto. And then when there was that big loss, he lost a lot of his cryptocurrency. And he's like, oh, whatever. I've lost all of that money. It was kind of like play money, like gambling for him. But for me, I was like, oh, well, since you've lost that money, let's sell what remains because I want to harvest these losses for tax loss. So, like one of the beauties of what our relationship, I think, is because we have enough, we're not arguing over money because he trusts me now that I have demonstrated enough expertise that I can go into his accounts, like investing his solo 401k. And I'm like, oh, I realized that I didn't do this, but he trusts that I can do that. And he has access to my account. I have access to his accounts. Now, I'm not going in there and judging his expenses, but we have complete transparency that we're not hiding anything. So I think really making sure that you have that strong foundation for financial success is really important with any partnership.
You know what? I love that. It just made me think about something that you said. And you said basically because you have enough, it's like you all aren't really arguing back and forth. I think that's fantastic. But it made me think about some of my friends who maybe aren't where you are,
Mhm.
especially my friends who are dating people who don't make as much money as they do.
Mm.
Whether it's my guy friends or my girlfriends, because I find that that is usually when there's a little bit more friction, if you will, right? If one person is making a large portion of the money, but then the other person is spending a large portion of the money, then there is like, okay, let's have a talk about how much you can spend. And oftentimes that can lead to resentment around the lower earner, right? And feeling like they're getting an allowance essentially, or having to ask for permission to spend things. And, one partner can feel like, hey, it's our money. The other person can feel like, well, I'm the one working for it. And
Mhm.
I think that in my personal experience, it's dependent on the gender, to be
Mhm.
completely honest. Like when the male is the person making more, I find that obviously they want to make sure that their partner is not just like spending everything that they make, but it's like they've accepted it. Like, okay, my partner, in this case, if you're talking about a heterosexual relationship, like if it's the guy that's making a lot of money, and let's say traditionally speaking, it was the female who maybe made less or was the homemaker or whatever, they would be like, okay, my wife is taking care of my kids or whatever. She can spend money on what she needs to. If it's a large expense, she'll let me know. And they just go on about their business. But some of my friends who are females and are married or dating men who don't make as much as them, that is when I've found has been some of the friction. And not to stereotype things, obviously there are people who fit into this and who do not, but it really did make me think about that. in terms of just societal norms and how when those gender roles are reversed, how sometimes
Mhm.
they can be hard to navigate. Even something as simple as just paying for a date, right? If you are somebody who is a physician like we are and you are making a lot of money and your partner maybe is doing well for himself or herself, but doesn't make as much as you do, right? Who's paying for the date? And you may say to yourself, oh, we're going to split the date or, oh, I'm going to pay this time. But I think having to pay every time sort of goes against societal standards. And that's when some of that resentment can build in. Sometimes you want to know, okay, are we contributing equally to this and that sort of thing? And then you have this
Mhm.
conversation about prenups and postnups and all of that. So I was just curious if you had, I know this is not your situation, but I was curious if you had any advice for people who may be in relationships where there is a large income discrepancy.
I would agree with what you're saying is that there's probably a little bit more financial tension when you have to negotiate who's doing what because of the disparity of income. I've seen that. I've had a client who's a radiologist and radiologists make a decent amount of money. And her partner was a teacher doing great work, doing their duty to society and being a great citizen, but just not compensated at the same level as a radiologist. Then I've had other partners who their spouses make a significant amount and it's a heterogeneous relationship. And they felt like, okay, I don't want to have a discussion about everything that I spend. Right. So I think one way to do this is to have a conversation. And this is what I coach my clients to do, regardless if you're on the end where you're the breadwinner or not, to have a conversation about what money values you have, to have a conversation of what money was like when you were growing up. Because I think once we can understand who that person is and how they think about money, what they believe about money, and their money behaviors, it allows us to provide some latitude and some flexibility and to say, okay, well, they're spending on this. I'm not going to judge them for that. Also, I think that there are many ways in which we can talk about money without actually talking about the dollar sign, like the actual value of money, and discuss, okay, these are my shared goals. These are the things that are important to me as far as the priorities. And that way, you know how much they're going to spend on those things. Or when they're spending on those things, okay, I remember that she talked about that's a priority for her or for him. If they're spending on something differently, then you can say, you know what? I remember we had this conversation. You tell me how much this actually doesn't mean to you. What I think we should really focus on joyful spending, studies have shown, or however you want to discuss it, and say, like, that should be one of the things that we focus on as a couple, because this is part of our financial plan. Another way that you can do this is seek equity within the relationship. So if one partner is earning, 4 times the amount of another partner, then what they contribute to that pot should be very similar to the proportion that they make so that you all can each have a decent amount of retention of your money and then see how that feels. Depending on what the discrepancy is, it could be that the person who's earning more is left with $10,000 to spend on whatever at the end of the month, and you're left with 1,000, and that doesn't feel equitable, right? So you just have to figure out, okay, what's going to feel equitable within this relationship and be okay with that. It's come up with a financial goal, financial vision, and talk about like how money feels for you.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's really good advice. And another thing that I've heard people say is that make sure that you position things so that your partner knows that it's you and your partner against whatever the issue is and that it's not you versus your partner. What I mean by
Mhm.
that is like if you maybe don't feel comfortable with the way that your partner is spending money, instead of being like, I don't like the way you spent money, or I don't understand why you bought this, or why did you do this that way? But just making sure that you have the same goals. Because I think for most people, if they know, hey, we have an emergency fund, hey, our bills are paid, hey, we have a certain amount that we're investing, we're going to be able to retire by this amount, then they really don't care how their partner spends money because they know the big ticket items are taken care of. It's when you don't have that reassurance and you feel like maybe your partner is spending in a way that is jeopardizing your goals. And I think in that
Mm.
situation, what I've heard people try to do is just say, all right, let's have a meeting, right? Let's talk about money. And maybe you don't frame it like that because that sort of sounds boring, but just like say, hey, I read this book about money. I would love to talk to you about it. Hey, I heard this podcast. They were talking about managing money with your partner. And I'd love to sort of get your take on things and to just bring up the conversation that you and your partner are aligned and where you're going with your goals, right? If you all both know, okay, we want to make sure that we're investing X amount of dollars each month. We want to make sure that we are saving X amount of dollars each month, or we want to make sure we're able to retire by this date, or we have X amount of dollars for our kids' college funds or whatever it is. What are our big goals? How much do we need to save and invest each month in order to hit our goals? And let's make sure that we prioritize that. And then
Mhm.
once that's taken care of, then we can spend the rest. And I think when you and your partner are aligned in your shared goals and you both are like willing to help reach those goals, then I think it makes it easier for the other person to sort of adjust their patterns of behavior. Because I don't know about you. If somebody came to me and said, hey, you're spending too much on wine or you go out to eat too much, I'd be like, look, I work way too hard. Like, don't
Mhm.
tell me how to spend. It just makes me defensive versus someone
Mhm.
said, hey, let's make sure we have the same goals. Let's make sure we're working towards the same thing. I think that we should both make sure that we're saving X amount or investing this amount. Then I'd be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then by default, I would then probably buy less wine or travel a little bit less to make sure that I'm meeting those goals. So I think it's all about reframing things and making sure that you and your partner are on the same team.
Yeah, I love that. I love the money dates. We do the money dates. All right. So, just as a recap, if you are someone who has been really thinking about how to bring up this money conversation with someone that you're dating or looking for better ways to improve money management with your spouse, the first thing that we want to say is like, this is important. So, we want you to do the thing that you've been avoiding doing. It's really important for the sustainability of your relationship and making sure that your relationship is financially well. And before you maybe bring up the topic of money, take a look at the relationship overall and have a conversation about, okay, what is the level of trust? What is the level of safety? And what is the level of transparency within the relationship? And how can you augment those things and have a conversation about some of those things? And then if you're bringing up things about money to just understand who they are and what they believe about money, take Lisha's approach and say like, hey, I spoke with my friends about this. And I know some people are doing this, some people are doing this. Where do you land on this? Just to get an idea to understand where they are. When you're building your finances with someone, you want to make sure that you have shared values and also thinking about what are some of the goals that you can work towards. Always seek fairness and equity and make sure that you have money dates so that you can really make this a consistent practice within your relationship.
As physicians, one of the most important things that we can do is make sure that we secure our income because a lot of our financial plans are contingent on our high doctor income. One of the things that you will need to do is make sure that you get long-term disability insurance.
Now, Pradeep and his team at PKA Insurance Group have a reputation for putting people over profits and always doing what's best. Do not hesitate to email PKA Insurance and his team today.
They will help you get the insurance you need with the service you deserve. Let's go to our money mishaps and confessions segment. I will go first. So, my money mishap is that I did not plan for car expenses. So, nothing wrong happened to my car, but I sort of forgot that at least where I live in Georgia, and I think it's this way in other states too, like you have to renew your tag or your license registration usually on your birthday. What is it called? Like your license plate renewal? I don't know the official name for it, but you have to renew that by your birthday usually. And my birthday was coming up. And so I got these notices and these emails that I needed to like renew that. And I was thinking, okay, I'm just going to go online, press a couple of buttons, pay like $20 and renew it. But I don't know if it's this way in Massachusetts, Brittany, but in the state of Georgia, you have to get an emissions test. Like you're not allowed to just like renew your tag online unless you have an emissions test. And that means you literally have to like drive to one of these emission test companies. They have to like run these tests on your car. It doesn't take super long, but it's like not the most convenient. It's like takes 45 minutes if there's no line. And they like run this stuff on your car. And I was like, I got to go and get the emissions test. And of course, that's not free. So I have to do that. And then, obviously I moved. You can't renew your tag with the old address. So I had to like update my address and I had to update it to the DMV on my license and then like send that information to like the county registrar and then wait for them to upload it in order to even be able to renew my thing. And it was this whole thing and it wasn't free. Now, it wasn't the most expensive thing. I think the whole process maybe cost less than $100. So it's not necessarily the cost, it's more of the time and the inconvenience. And I like totally forgot that I needed to go through this whole thing. Is that the same for you? Like in Massachusetts, do you have to do this every year? Like get an emissions test and like update your address and like renew your tags and all this stuff?
We don't need the emissions test to update our registration, our vehicle registration, but the emissions test, we're required to get that every single year. And for every person, it's different, but that is a requirement for Massachusetts.
Oh, okay. When I lived in Florida, I didn't have to worry about it. And although I've moved around a lot, I hadn't really changed my official address. I just kept Florida as my main address for so long that when I finally decided I'm going to be an adult and actually update my address, then I was like, oh, wow, I had to do all this stuff. Like, I remember when I moved to Georgia for the first time, you had to like register your car with the county and they make you pay taxes on the value of your car. I don't know if this happened when you moved to Massachusetts, but when I moved to Georgia, they like assessed the value of my car. And then they were like, okay, you need to pay taxes on your car. I was like, what? And it was
Hmm.
thousands of dollars. I remember that like it was yesterday. Is that something that you'll have to do in Massachusetts too?
Yeah, it's annual. It's an excise tax that we have to pay on our cars. And of course, my
Annual?
car is 19 years old. So, and the value of the car is not that much. It's a Saturn Ion. So we don't have to pay much for Emerald. But for Mercedes, she's expensive.
Oh my gosh. First of all, you're like well off physician driving a 19-year-old car. So we'll talk about that a different day. Well, it is a judgment free zone. I just find it comical because I think it's a perfect example of how you and I each splurge on the things that really matter to us. And we really are frugal in the things that don't matter to us. And I think you and I both share this in that we don't really care as much about cars. And so we tend to drive older cars versus like some of our other physician colleagues who really do value driving a nice car. And we'll probably do a whole episode on like the cost of cars and the best way to do that. But it's just interesting as I hear you're driving a 19-year car, your husband has like this Mercedes. Y'all are just very different in terms of what you value. But I think it's interesting.
Yeah, the Mercedes, we just purchased the Mercedes 2022, so she's fairly new, but my husband's car was like 16 years old
Oh, okay.
before. Alrighty. Well, Alicia, I'm happy that you got all the things that you needed to get in order to drive safely without being pulled over by the police and getting another thing that could be a money mishap is a ticket for expired registration.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so my money mishap is a little bit different. I think I shared on the podcast earlier in the episodes about the SEP IRA. Actually, it was in episode 6 when we were talking about backdoor Roths, about the SEP IRA, in which it limited our ability to do, or my husband's ability to do a backdoor Roth. And we rolled that over into a solo 401k. And we did that in October of last year. And then I was just like reviewing his stuff. I'm not as mindful about his stuff as I am about my stuff. And so I was just reviewing. I was like, did I invest that solo 401k stuff? And lo and behold, I did not invest the money that we rolled over from the SEP IRA to the solo 401k. So when we rolled over the account, we had to sell all of the investments within the account and purchase them again. So I hadn't invested it. Now I've remedied that. I've picked investments, but it's so funny because after I did that, it triggered some type of alert in Fidelity. And my husband's like sending me snapshots of people calling him, like, hey, we just want to discuss the financial advisor. We wanted to discuss investing for you. And I'm like, tell them we got it. We can do it on our own. But if you want to have a conversation, sure. Sometimes I have conversations with advisors and other people who I don't necessarily need, but I want to see one, if I can learn anything from them, and then two, to test my knowledge. Good exercise, because it can be so intimidating when you're talking to someone who does this day in and day out. But it is also very affirming when you can go into that conversation, understand what they're talking about, and maybe leave with one or two nuggets of information that you hadn't thought about, but still feeling very confident that you can manage it on your own. So, money mistake, we missed out of 6 months of interest because that money was not invested.
Well, I will say one moment of grace is that usually even before the money's being invested, it's in a like a holding account. And that holding account at most places, including Fidelity, is usually a money market fund. You probably were gaining some sort of interest, not as much as you would have gotten if you'd invested it, but at least it's better than earning zero. And then for
Yeah.
people who maybe aren't as familiar with what Brittany is referring to, so when you are self-employed or you are a locums physician or you just make extra money on the side, you can open what's called a solo 401k. So it's a type of retirement account for people who are employed by themselves. And what you were talking about, Brittany, is you had money in a SEP IRA, different type of retirement account, and you rolled it into a solo 401k. And so you put the money in the account, but you didn't choose how you wanted the money to be invested. And I'm pointing this out because I think there are a lot of people listening to this that maybe haven't done that either, right? They're maybe investing money through their jobs 401k or 403b. And they put the money in the account, but they didn't choose how they wanted the money to be invested. Or they've heard of a Roth IRA, so they opened that account and they put the money in the account, but they didn't choose how they wanted the money to be invested. And that is such a critical step that I think a lot of people forget about. And so this is your reminder from your favorite money best friends that if you have money invested in an account, you need to choose how you want that money to be invested. Otherwise, it's just sitting there. Now, at most jobs, they recognize that a lot of people are not going to choose how they want the money at their job to be invested. And so usually there's some sort of default investing option, but that is not the case at every job. And it is certainly not the case when it comes to solo 401k accounts at brokerage firms or Roth IRA at brokerage firms. That money will just sit there. And so if you have not chosen how you want that money to be invested, take this as your reminder to do so.
Yeah, Lisha, that's a great point. And I think it's one of the common pitfalls of doing it on your own because it is multiple steps often. When you put money into an account, you have to wait for that money to actually show up so that it can be invested. And that time delay, life gets busy and you forget. So if you're someone and you're just like putting the money into your backdoor Roth IRA now, set an alarm, which is what I should have done so that it reminded me to go back and invest that money. All right, but now it's invested. So I fixed that money mistake. And I just want everybody to know, like Lisha and I, we make mistakes, right? And the thing is just like knowing what the mistake is, trying to create systems so that you can safeguard yourself from that mistake happening in the future and giving yourself enough grace to know that even though you made a mistake, you're still doing a lot right and just move forward. Okay, Lisha, I just got a facial and usually I don't spend money on myself. So I'm really excited that I got this facial. That's what I'm doing with my money. Well, that's what I did with my money. I don't know if it's going to be a practice that I'm going to do often for fun money, but what have you done fun with your money recently?
Oh, you know what? I've been buying these new espresso. I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it, pods, like for coffee. So I drink coffee in the mornings. And up until this year, I would just use my Keurig. Like I'm not like a huge coffee snob or anything like that. I'm just somebody who needs caffeine in the morning to sort of start my day. And so I usually brew a cup of coffee from my Keurig. If I'm out and about or I'm out of town, I'll like go to Starbucks or go to some coffee shop or whatever and grab a cup of coffee. One of my brothers for Christmas bought me like an espresso machine and it was just sitting in the box for a long time until I went to visit one of my friends who had an espresso machine at her house. And she made me a cup of coffee with the espresso machine and it had the foam at the top and it was just so good. And she was like, yeah, this is like a step up from the Keurig. She was like, Lisha, throw away your Keurig. Keurig's like so last year. She was like, we got to up your coffee game. You need an espresso machine. And I've noticed that my friends who are a little bit more well off, they all have espresso machines in their homes. They don't have Keurigs anymore. So I did notice this. And my brother had bought me one. It was probably my sister-in-law who is a physician. But anyway, they as a couple brought me an espresso machine for Christmas and it was sitting in the box for a long time. And I was like, well, I'm going to try this thing. And so I ran out of Keurig pods. And so that really was the impetus of like, okay, I ran out of Keurig pods. I have this espresso machine. My brother bought me a bunch of espresso pods. So I'm going to try this out. It was so good. And I was like, what have I been doing with my life? Why have I been letting this thing sit in the box for so long? And now I have basically improved my coffee game. And so this means I've used them so much that now I like need to buy new espresso pods. And the thing that I realized is that I can't just like go to Kroger or like Publix or like some grocery store and like get the espresso pods. I actually need to order them. So I'm going to like order them off Amazon. But that is something fun that I'm doing with money is spending a little bit more money than when I usually spend on my K pods and buying some espresso pods because now I have improved my coffee game.
Love that. I've already shared about my colleague who did the espresso thing
Oh,
and
yes,
had
yes, 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 yes.
interfibrillation. Yeah. So caution, Lisha. I don't want in Emory calling or Morehouse calling Grady like, oh, Dr. Lisha can't show up for your meeting today because we had to cardiovert her.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I only do 1 cup in the morning for the most part, maybe 2 if it's a special morning. I never do more than that. Oh my gosh, I can't do that much caffeine. But yes, I will not be like your former colleague who drank so many espresso cups that he basically put himself in the hospital that he was working at. So became a patient.
Yeah.
We will avoid that. I will just do 1 cup, maybe 2 if it's a particularly hard day. But yes, that's something fun that I'm doing with money.
All right. Thank you for listening to this episode. And we hope that it allows you to have more harmony with your money and in your partnerships. And we just really appreciate you being here today, listening to us, and we will see you in the next episode. Hello, and thank you for listening to our podcast. And because of that, we have something for you, our Wealthy Mind Starter Kit.
Have you ever thought to yourself, I wish I could be better with money? Do you want to start investing and saving for retirement, but keep delaying because you don't know where to start? Our Wealthy Mind Starter Kit is here to help.
This guide will teach you what you didn't learn in your training so you can stop being confused about money and start taking what we call wealthy-minded action.
We'll help you become a master of your finances and simplify investing so you can get started today. Take control of your financial future by downloading your free copy of the Wealthy Mind starter kit now and start building the wealth you deserve.
Hello, everybody. It's me, Brooke. I'm recording a little disclaimer for my mommy, Dr. Brittne Halford, and her friend, Dr. Lisha Taylor. Just so you know, they're not financial advisors, tax professionals, lawyers, or financial planners. Everything you hear is for education and entertainment. It's not strict financial advice, you know. So use your best judgment, chat with a tax professional, and all those other people that you need to talk to. Thanks for tuning in today. Keep cruising on your journey to wealth and wellness. Bye-bye.
One of the most important things you can do is ensure you have long-term disability insurance. Long-term disability insurance secures your income if the unexpected happens and you are unable to work due to medical illness, chronic conditions, or an accident.
Unfortunately, all insurance agents aren't created equal. Some of them are so focused on making a sale that they fail to reveal certain necessary information, tell you about discounts available, or clearly explain the process. Pradeep Botto and his team at PKA Insurance Group are different. They have a reputation of putting people over profits and always doing what's best.
If you need life insurance or disability insurance, reach out to Pradeep and his team today. They will help you get the insurance you need with the service you deserve.